There's an entire group of people who know exactly what they need to do and still can't do it. They've had the conversations, they've cried in the car on the way home more times than they can count. They've Googled signs you should leave a relationship at 2 a.m. and recognized every single one. And yet, they stay. Psychologists have a pretty good understanding of why this happens, and once you hear it, you won't be able to unsee it. If you've ever found yourself making excuses for someone who consistently makes you feel alone, today we're going to examine what's actually happening from a psychological perspective. Because here's what most people miss. Love is not the problem. You probably love this person, you might love them deeply, and that love is real. But love without action is just a feeling with nowhere to go. Think about it this way. If someone stopped showing up to their job, they'd get fired. Doesn't matter how much they love that job. Passion doesn't replace presence. And yet when we apply that exact same logic to relationships, something short circuits in our brains. Nobody ever told you that your relationship also requires showing up consistently, or you lose it. And the reason that analogy makes perfect sense at work but falls apart in relationships is that not enough people have said it out loud. Closeness with another person demands certain things from both of you. Things like trust, safety, accountability, empathy, and genuine curiosity about who the other person actually is. And here's the part worth writing down. You will never feel close to someone who has no interest in those things. You can keep hoping, you can keep waiting, but the destination of a relationship where only one person is doing that work is always the same: loneliness, resentment, distance. Here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Research on attachment theory tells us that humans are wired to maintain connection even when that connection is painful. Our brains, particularly the regions governing social bonding, will actually rationalize poor treatment before they'll accept the possibility of abandonment. So when you keep finding reasons to stay, that's not weakness. That's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. But there's a cost. The longer we stay in emotionally dysregulating environments, the more our capacity for clear judgment gets compromised. Your body starts keeping score even when your mind is still negotiating. And that score shows up as anxiety, as irritability, as a kind of low-grade exhaustion that you can't quite explain to people who aren't inside the relationship with you. And this is where it gets complicated, because you're probably not in a relationship with a monster. You're in a relationship with someone who has good days, someone who occasionally shows you exactly who you hoped they were. And not inconsistency, that push and pull, that hot and cold, is actually more psychologically destabilizing than consistent coldness would be. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral attachment than predictable ones, which means the relationship that confuses you the most is often the hardest one to leave. Not because you're irrational, because your brain is responding exactly the way brains respond to unpredictable reward systems. Nobody really talks about this part, so you end up in this paradox that's honestly pretty unusual. You want to leave, but leaving feels like failure. You know something is wrong, but you can't quite name it clearly enough to act on it. You're angry at them, but you're also angry at yourself for still being here. And underneath all of that anger is something worth paying attention to, because anger in a relationship is rarely just anger. It's information. It's your emotional system flagging that something important is being consistently neglected. The goal isn't to suppress it or let it leak out sideways onto other people. The goal is to listen to what it's actually trying to tell you. What seems to define people in this position is a very specific combination. You're self-aware enough to know the relationship isn't working, but emotionally invested enough that the knowing doesn't automatically lead to leaving. You can see the problem clearly and still feel powerless to solve it. That tension is exhausting in a way that's very hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived inside it. But here's where things get messy. The cultural conversation around unhealthy relationships tends to focus on dramatic, obvious abuse, as if the only relationships worth leaving are the ones everyone around you can clearly see are terrible.
but the specific experience of being consistently deprioritized, of feeling invisible to someone who claims to love you, of slowly shrinking yourself to keep the peace, creates real psychological damage that doesn't fit neatly into those categories. And the question that actually cuts through all of it comes from researcher Terry Real. Are enough of your needs being met to grieve the ones that aren't? Not are all your needs met, enough of them, because no relationship is going to fulfill every need you have. That's not what we're measuring. The real question is whether your partner has any genuine interest in learning what you need and meeting enough of it that you still feel valued, respected, and connected. If yes, the relationship is worth the work. If not, you already have your answer. You're just not ready to say it out loud yet.
And maybe you feel like you don't quite fit anywhere in this conversation. Too hurt to pretend everything is fine, too invested to walk away cleanly, caught between the relationship you hoped this would become and the one you're actually in. That's not a character flaw. That's the defining feature of this specific experience. And it deserves to be taken seriously rather than flattened into simple advice about just leaving. In a world that treats leaving as the obvious answer, the people who stay and try and exhaust every option before walking away aren't weak. They're people who understood that real relationships require real effort, and they showed up for that. The painful part is when only one person does. Here's what that tends to look like in practice. You apologize first, almost every time. You track their mood before you bring something up. You edit yourself constantly, calculating whether this is a good moment to be honest or whether honesty will just start another fight. And somewhere along the way, that kind of hypervigilance becomes your baseline. You stop noticing that you're doing it because it's just become how you function in this relationship. That's not love. That's adaptation to an environment that isn't safe. And your nervous system knows the difference even when you've convinced your conscious mind that this is just how relationships work. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, you say it out loud. This relationship doesn't work for me right now. Not to them necessarily, to yourself. Because the single most common thing people in this situation share is that they haven't been fully honest with themselves. They've been managing, coping, hoping, but not actually naming what's true. Second, you ask the only question that matters. Does your partner have any genuine interest in changing this? Not could they change, everyone could. Will they? Do they show any curiosity about your inner world? Do they take accountability when they hurt you? Do they repair, or do they just wait for things to calm down and then continue as before? Because knowing you should do something and actually putting in the work to do it are two entirely different things with two entirely different outcomes. And if you decide to leave, prepare for something that doesn't get talked about enough. People will say things like, "That's too bad you couldn't make it work." And what they won't know is that you were the only one keeping it alive. You carried the emotional labor. You initiated the heart conversations. You read the books and suggested the counseling and tried to find new ways to communicate. The relationship ending is not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of what happens when only one person is doing the work of two. Your job after that is not to let shame win. It's to step back, give yourself some grace, and get honest about what you're supposed to learn from this. Not as self-punishment, as genuine self-reflection. Because the patterns that led you here didn't start with this relationship, and they won't end with it unless you look at them directly. You stayed because you loved someone and believed things could get better. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's actually the most human thing there is. The question now is whether you're willing to hold a new standard. Not a perfect standard, just an honest one. A relationship where both people are curious about each other, where accountability is real and not just performed, where you don't have to earn your right to be heard. That's not asking for too much. That's actually the bare minimum of what love is supposed to feel like. And the fact that it's felt like too much to ask for is the only thing you really need to know. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing. I've got more videos exploring the psychology behind the patterns we find hardest to see in ourselves. Same depth, different topics. I'll see you in the next one.